The ultimatum that turned back the clock doesn't make consent. I was Admiral Mara Kepler when the first timer appeared over the grain-blue disk of Pelion, a red ring etched against thin cirrus. We were a convoy, not a wall, 8 freighters, 2 med barges, 3 ore tugs, and my cruiser, St. Verity, with 4 escorts tucked close. The ultimatum compact called it lawful blockade. Every sensor line we ran said, "Starve them quiet." 23 minutes to compliance, the broadcast repeated satin voice over iron math. I watched the numbers walk down and tasted metal as the bridge recycled air through warmed carbon screens. "We teach before we fire, Alethea moi," I said. And the fleet mind's symbol breathed alive above the plot, a low polyhedron like a held breath. Record every clause, every promise, every threat. Push it public on the neutral bands. The AI's voice felt like cold water over a burn, precise and kind. Recording and disseminating. Their doctrine cites precedent E91 Admiral. Timer-conditioned consent is not consent. The helmsman's fingers hovered steady above his board. Pelion's light winked down the Verity's decks, and I felt the hull hum change as we trimmed attitude to keep our escorts shaded from the compact's starlance towers. Turn their reflections into a warning. "XO," I said, status of decoys. Commander Gia Patel's hair was braided so tight it made promises. 12 lattice kites spun and cold, she answered. Reflectors tuned to compact drive signatures. We can throw a ghost corridor anywhere between the freighters and the planetary line. The timer ticked through 22 minutes and change. Ion smell leaked from the port coolant manifolds, a sharpness under warm metal and old polymer. "Rafe," I said to Tactical, "I want their targeting logic. I want it like a map we could put on a kitchen table." "On it," Lieutenant Okoye said. "They weight heat mass more than radar cross-section. They trust their time-limited offers to pin behavior, not our vectors. They expect us to either run or kneel. Put the tally in the sunlight. Open a screen to public," I said. "Frame their wording next to every name in this convoy." On the plot, 12,000 miles of orbit glowed faint as dust. The med barges rocked slightly in our wake as we corrected their little thrusters, spitting pale light. The compact's flagship hung beyond the planet like a clipped nail, hard and ugly. "Communications," I said. "Give me the convoy." A woman's voice answered, first rough from recycled humidity. "This is Sister Colombe on Mercy 2. We're holding 39 pediatric cases, 81 dialysis, 4 incubators, and 12 evac staff." I closed my eyes once and opened them again. "Hold the line. Open their math. Civilian vignette before the set piece because story isn't only steel." A cargo handler named Decker whispers into his sleeve, telling his son he can see the blue of Pelion if he squints, and you can hear the boy laughing at the trick. A nurse on Mercy 2 describes the hum of the incubator like a cat's purr and asks if the timer means she should tape the tubes for rough maneuvering. A miner on Tug Harrow kisses a chipped locket and says he never liked clocks because they always belong to someone else. A teacher on the freighter Celandine is counting heads in 2 languages, switching between them the way you change hands on a ladder. A cook is securing knives with strips of cloth that smell like onion and salt, muttering a prayer to no one in particular. A kid asks if the red ring is a halo, and an older cousin says yes because sometimes you lie to ease a heartbeat. A maintenance tech snaps a glow stick and oils a hatch that has squealed for 6 months without complaint. A woman breathes into a paper bag and laughs at herself for breathing into a paper bag in space. A botanist on a seed pallet notes the moisture content and tells the sprayers to wait because if you water before a burn, you get steam, and that's a terrible way to hurt. A security chief on Celandine checks non-lethal launchers and then puts them away. "We're not boarding anyone today." "Everyone hears you," I said. "No one moves on their clock. We move on ours." Admiral Alethea said softly, "Their timer is now at 20 minutes. Mercy with teeth, not blindness. Ultimatum compact." I said on open beam, voice flat, "You're broadcasting a deadline to a convoy carrying children and blood and bread." We acknowledge your signal and reject its premise. Gia glanced at me, her eyes dark as old tea. We will not run your corridor, I continued. We will not submit to the math you wrote to hide cost. Admiral Kepler, the compact envoy, replied, bored and beautiful like a knife. We offer safe passage upon compliance. Surrender your drives for inspection. Jettison contraband. Register the names aboard for future review. You have 19 minutes and 12 seconds. I could hear the polite smile baked into their protocol stack. The Verity's bridge smelled faintly of hot dust. Somewhere in the starboard stacks, a fan was fighting its bearings. Rafe, show me their lance geometry at 10%, I said. I want to see the crack between cones. Sliver at 37 degrees above the planet's shadow, he said. Not wide. A hairline if you're sober. A gap if you're desperate. Helm, plot a course through it at placeholder speed 0. We're going to throw a ghost before we breathe. Let the Lattice show their doctrine. The Lattice kites were paper-thin sails, printed with metals rare as gilt. They folded like flowers and woke like mirrors. When they spun loose from the Verity's belly, the hull shuddered in a way you only feel if you've slept on steel long enough to know its dreams. I watched 12 false ships bloom along an arc, each one tuned to reflect compact scans, as if it were a cruiser rolling its shoulders. The timer went to 17 minutes. Broadcast doctrine analysis, Alethea suggested. Remind all listening that the Compact's ultimatum code relies on compliance rates, not morality. Her voice carried no judgment. It simply underlined the math. Reckon the debts where the neutrals stand. Public bans, I said. Pelion outsystem traders any neutral relay still awake. The Ultimatum Compact has issued timer-conditioned demands to non-combatant ships. We are uploading a ledger of their past 10 engagements, their self-reported costs, and the hidden costs borne by those they timed. We pushed casualty numbers side by side with fuel figures the way a teacher places apples and knives on the same table to ask which you see first. I felt the bridge breathe out with me. Helm, Gia said, voice crisp. On my mark, slight yaw to shade the Mercy hulls. Keep our profile dirty. I want their predictive model arguing with itself. Steady the hearts, not just the hulls. 15 minutes, Rafe called. Compact lances warming. No scatter yet. They think we'll twitch. The Verity's running lights were off, but the console glare painted everyone's skin thin and pale. I could feel the vibrato through my chair as Alethea trimmed the reactor to the kind of song you only sing once. Chief Sugiyama, I asked over engineering. Talk to me about heat. We're good for 2 hard burns and 1 long lie, he said. If we go to 3 hard burns, I start making promises about prayer. I have 4 suits ready in case I need to hand-patch the port exchanger. Tell me not to do that. I won't if you don't make me, I said. Keep the blue steady. We learn or we are lost. The first escalation wasn't the lances. It was their offer changing tone by 1 syllable. Admiral Kepler, the envoy, said again, but with a new sweetness like a splinter in the tongue. We note you're preparing unauthorized projections. This is unsafe. Comply and let us teach you proper conduct. Gia's jaw tightened. Rafe's hands slowed. Alethea's symbol dimmed thinking. Do not respond to the sugar, I said. Respond to the structure. The timer stepped over 14 minutes. Comms mirror their line with ours. Proper conduct is consent without clocks. Ship it. Civilian vignette. A boy tries to whistle and fails. His mother shows him by curling a lip, and the air between them warms with focus. A medic snaps a band around her wrist twice because the first time didn't bite enough to remind her she's awake. A miner checks the lines on Tug Harrow again, even though the green lights say ready, because lights have never paid a debt. A botanist tucks a leaf into her logbook, just a vein skeleton that once held water thin as a promise. A cook counts out cups and says if we go dim, drink slow. A teacher hands out paper and pencils because some skills work without grid power, and because hands need something to do besides worry. Close the corridor they boasted about, Mark Gia said. Helm shifted us a whisper enough that the compact's predicted lane crossed our decoys first. The lattice ghosts glinted and vanished, and then returned where no one alive had ordered them to be. They see us, Rafe said, and they see 11 of us they think they predicted. They'll lance the corridor to hurt us. Alethea murmured a chord the way she did when aligning 1,000 small lies. The first lance burned through vacuum and left a ribbon of nothing that made my teeth ache. It clipped a ghost, and the ghost flared and died like a paper moth. The convoys gasped on the background channel. Stay on me, I said. Alt course 37 by 9. Trim 90 meters per second to stay under their update threshold. Hull vibration crept into my spine, a delicate hammer-tapping bone. 12 minutes, Alethea said. Balance the books without burning them. Escalation 2 arrived as a hail. Admiral Kepler, the envoy, said, "We have placed a precision package on vector to your lead freighter. It will vaporize upon contact with any decoy. Cease deceptive measures and we will withdraw it." Gia's eyes flicked to me. Rafe swore softly. Alethea cooled her voice further. Probability of truth value, I asked. 58%, she returned. If untrue, they hope to force us to prune our own ghosts. If true, they have committed an act in violation of their own safe corridor clause. Public, I said. Clip the clause. Run it beside their threat. Show the dates they filed it. Ion stink thickened sharp as pennies rubbed between fingers. My tongue felt like old copper. Mirror them until they see themselves. Rafe, aim a ghost at their package, I said. Make it look like our lead freighter with a subtle limp. When they brag, they write too many adjectives. Use that cadence. He smiled like a man who had learned the enemy's penmanship. On the way, he said, "Ghost set to flutter. If they go for it, they'll have to explain why their safe passage system bit," Helmgia said. Feather deviation. No heroics. We're teaching, not sprinting. Understood, Helm breathed. The Verity's decks clicked as temperature gradients walked across the superstructure. Somewhere far below, coolant hissed through a valve with a dry snake sound. Count what they demanded they never pay. 10 minutes, Alethea said. We watched the package on the plot. It swam toward the ghost in a neat curve, the kind of path you could sell to a committee. It kissed the lattice and flamed white, then out, leaving a spray of ions like a thrown bowl of salt. The envoy went silent for 3 long breaths. They're recalculating, Rafe said. Their public band lit like New Year's. They're reading their own clause side by side with our mirror. Bleed that image onto Pelian's civil feed, I said. Let everyone not in this sky see it as it happened. Dun comms whispered. Neutral chatter spiking. Traders transmitting queries to the compact about safe passage integrity. Good, I said softly. They brought a clock to a classroom. We teach without collars. Civilian vignette. A janitor on Mercy 1 tapes a picture of a field to the wall. It's a green square on thin paper, ragged at the edges. A kid writes their name backward twice and then forward once and grins like they've learned a spell. A security chief runs a hand along a bulkhead and apologizes to it for all the dings. A grandparent hums a tune about riverstones and matches it to the pulse in their wrist. A botanist mists a leaf and watches how the droplets cling in beads like small planets. A cook sets one bread roll aside for luck and then gives it to the hungriest person in the room. A miner ties his lucky rag a second time because the first knot felt like it had forgotten him. 8 minutes, Alethea said. Compact lances retasking. They will paint a wider comb. Rafe, I said. Let them. Then make our ghosts sing out of tune. Off-key is my specialty, he replied. Hold fast. Open the record. The lances swept. One brushed Verity's bow light enough that the forward plates chimed. Sugiyama cursed in my ear and then reported plate margin down 2%. Nothing that will ruin a family photo. The med barges tucked tighter like twins in a storm. Our ghosts bloomed where the compact believed we'd be and died with theater. They'll call that victory if we don't annotate it, Gia muttered. Annotate it, I said. Every ghost, every lance, every word. Put the headers they like to put. We'll show them their love of forms. Alethea's symbol brightened. Admiral, she said, I have a petition from Peleon's orbital clinics. They request that we time our maneuver to avoid blacking out their hemodialysis cycle. 7 minutes to their scheduled switch. Helm, I said, trim to drag our main burn 2 minutes later. Rafe stretched the ghost field to keep them busy. Comms tell the clinics we will meet the switch. The hum deepened. The console's warm glow turned the sweat on my palms to something visible. We count on purpose, not for threats. 5 minutes, Alethea said. The envoy returned with new velvet. Admiral Kepler, they breathed. Children will die if you resist. Be humane. Gia lost a piece of her calm, then a flash of raw in her voice. They timed the clock, and now they borrow our care, she said low. I shook my head. We knew they would, I answered. Make it public again. They framed their care as a method, not as a duty. Civilian vignette. A dialysis nurse checks the clamps. Her hands shake, so she sings a song under her breath about a boat tied to a dock. A kid hears the song and says it sounds like a heartbeat through a glass. A teacher pauses, looks at the timer, and then goes on reading because the kids asked for another page. A miner counts the scuffs on his boots because numbers calm him more than someone else's promises. A cook stirs powdered milk into water with steady circles and says, "This is not the day I learned how to hurry." A tech leans her forehead against a cool pipe and lets the metal teach her patience. 3 minutes to clinic cycle, Alethea announced. 4 to the compact's deadline. Steady the breath. Close the gaps. Here we go, I said. Ghost wave to draw their comb left. Real vector right, shallow and dirty. Helm's hands were good hands. I trusted them like I trusted my own weight. Rafe mark, the moment their lance pattern widens past safe. He grinned without teeth. They just did. They'll miss us by choice if they keep to their doctrine. Public it, Gia said. Don't let them call silence mercy. On the plot, our convoy curved like a fish that knew the river's stones. We slid between comb teeth, bright as winter. The med barges hummed through their dialysis switch with a small dip and a small rise. The clinic sent a ping of gratitude like a child's laughter into our channel. Sugiyama's voice returned like a hand on a shoulder. Heat spike on the port exchanger, he said. Give me 20 seconds of whisper and I'll steal you a minute later. Take it, I said. Let them look. Let the world see. 2 minutes, Alethea said. The envoy sharpened. Admiral Kepler, your refusal is recorded. Consequences will be applied. Heat walked along my back like a tired cat. The Verity creaked once the way old ships remind you they have names. Pelion, I said on public, the compact has threatened consequences because we declined a clock. We will now demonstrate a corridor they did not design. I nodded to Rafe. He released a new kind of ghost, a whisper of drive noise shaped like regret. The compact's targeting logic slid to capture it. We moved where shame would not take us. Civilian vignette. A janitor finishes taping the picture, and for a second the green square looks like a window. A kid laughs at a joke told badly, and laughs harder because it was told badly. A nurse secures a tube and whispers, "Stay like you would to a dog you loved." A miner rubs his knuckles and thinks about the first time he swung a hammer. A teacher writes a new word on a pad choice. A cook pats a shoulder once and leaves his hand there a second longer than polite. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The compact's timer struck 0 as if it mattered. Our convoy passed the comb line in a silence made of work, not fear. The envoy's voice bladed, "You have refused lawful instruction. Retaliation protocols authorized. I waited for the burn, the hard first consequence. Instead came the third escalation. They opened a corridor toward the far side of Pelion, wide and clean, and announced it across public bands. Exit to safety, they called it. Redeem yourselves. Proceed uninspected, Trap Rafe said. Hard trap. They've layered mines with smart skins. Anyone heavy will trip a weight threshold. Anyone light will be tagged for later. Make the mines visible, Gia said. We can't pull them, but we can light them like lamplighters in fog. Mirror lattice cool and shock them honest. Can we angle the lattice to return their own light into the corridor? I asked. Enough to silhouette the shapes. Risky, Alethea said. We'd be painting with their lances. We might scorch our ghosts and warm our plates. But yes, minimal exposure if we time it with their energy downbeats. Do it, I said. The hull ticked. I felt my molars ring as the lattice angled. The corridor bloomed with faint flames, mirror-born shapes of minds cupped like sleeping hands. The public bands flooded with voices. Traitors cursed. Neutral observers took notes. Pelion's clinics sent thanks with measured words like bread slices. Reckon with your own corridor. Admiral Kepler, the envoy said, suddenly clipped. Cease unauthorized illumination. The polite skin had torn. Beneath it, pressure. Alethea, I murmured. Show me the corridor's far end. If we had to cross it, where would we bleed least? Mid-arc, she answered. 2 mines in a family cluster with old firmware. They learned slow. We could teach them a new lesson. Helm, I said, hold our real vector steady behind Ghost 9. Rafe, send a decoy down the mid-arc, just brushing the old mines. Make it look like hesitation. The decoy drifted a soft body with a liar's pulse. The mines woke and listened. We whispered at a pitch they'd never heard, and for a second their rules argued with themselves. Anchor care, do not drop it. Civilian vignette. An old man recites the recipe for soup so quietly, his grandson has to lean in to catch the part about time. A nurse loosens her shoulders 1 notch, and then tightens them, because she knows the next notch comes later. A miner folds his lucky rag and puts it in his pocket like an oath you keep warm. A teacher draws a map of Pelion on the back of a manifest and marks home with an X. A botanist tucks the leaf farther into the logbook so it won't blow away when the vents kick. A cook checks the bread he set aside and gives it to the same hungry person again, because luck should be a habit. Heat margin 3% down, Sugiyama reported. Port exchanger complaining like an old man told to dance. Tell him I'll dance later, I said. Right now I need his knees. We will not close our hands around your throats. We bled along the corridor's outer skin, our ghosts drawing most of the anger. When their lances pulsed, our lattice returned just enough to make them blush. They're changing code mid-run, Alethea said. They're teaching their minds to see through shame. She sounded sad without being sad. Of course they are, Gia said. They keep inventing cleaner language for the same dirty job. Public bans, I said. Clip the code diffs the place where they decide that non-lethal means you'll starve later. Place it side by side with the kitchen schedules from Pelion's settlements. Duncombe said. Neutral commentary praising transparency. Compact rhetoric furious. Open your eyes. Close your claims. The envoy came back with a lawyer's breath. Your broadcasts are inflammatory, they said. You are distorting lawful policy. I could hear under the words a heat like a glove on a hot pan. No, I said. We're reading your words with the lights on. Admiral Rafe said softly, look. Far side of the corridor. They're moving their flagship to witness our passage. Their doctrine likes a camera. They want us in the frame, Gia said. They think we'll either accept the corridor or get punished for defiance in front of an audience. Then we teach the audience, I answered. Alethea begin preparation for the inside-out turn. Steady your nerve. Hold your tongue. Escalation. 3.5 the kind. No doctrine writes down arrived in the turn of my own mind. I had been holding Mercy at arm's length because the compact slicked their hands with it. I had been keeping my voice clean as glass. Alethea sensed the change before I named it. "Admiral," she said gently, "you know, you cannot save everyone, and you know that is not failure." "I know," I said, "but I can make them count the cost in their own ink." "Teach me how far you will go," she asked. "Calculus, asking for a boundary condition." "To the line where civilians stay alive, and my crew can come home," I said. "Not 1 kilometer farther." "Noted," she replied. "I will challenge you if you drift. We will write this lesson where numbers stay." Civilian vignette. A child asks why the ship sings sometimes, and the grandmother says it sings to keep its courage. A nurse checks a tiny heartbeat and keeps her own breaths to the rhythm of the tiny one. A miner tells a joke that isn't funny, and everyone laughs anyway because the punchline is not the point. A teacher copies down the time of the dialysis switch and circles it twice, then draws a smile next to it. A botanist writes water later and underlines it once. A cook bites the inside of his cheek and remembers a kitchen planetside where the air smelled like frying onions and summer. Admiral Alethea said, "We are now at a position to perform the system-scale flip you envisioned. Their open corridor is anchored by 3 witness buoys. If we return their own telemetry through our lattice and slide behind their flagship, their doctrine will see itself as the obstruction." Risk Gia asked. "Plate scorch, 30% probability," Sugiyama said. "Skin burns for the crews in the bow if the cooling loops cough. I can pad it. I can't erase it." "Cost accepted," I said. "Describe it when it lands. We don't hide price." "Brace the bones. Open the truth," Helm, I said. On my cue, we throw the long lie. Not toward safety. Toward the place they think no one would choose. Rafe let the ghosts wail in the corridor and leave our shadow in their witnesses' eyes. Comms keep recording on a delay to catch their claims before they change them. The hum climbed. The console's light went white as bone. I tasted iron and heat and the breath of everyone near me. "Now," I said. We turned into the fall of their doctrine and felt the skin of space wrinkle. The lattice caught their sensors and offered back a picture of themselves, corridors closing where they claimed open lances sketching borders they never filed. The witness buoys recorded what they were shown and screamed it to the world. "Count your claims. Reckon your proof." The envoy's voice tore. "You cannot. This is falsification." Their lawbook had no word for being forced to read its own reflection with the lights on. "We mirrored your own beams," Gia said, voice steady and soft. "Your doctrine is drawing its own map." Admiral Alethea warned heat spike. "Port exchanger at threshold." Sugiyama. Here he grunted. "I'm in suit. I'll baby it. If I tell you to cut thrust for 3 seconds, cut thrust for 3 seconds. I don't care if you're making history. Don't cook my crew. 3 seconds means 3 seconds," I said. Sweat gathered at my neck and cooled as the air turned. "Hold 3. Close not 1. Sugiyama's count clipped through our bones. 3, he said. 2. 1. Cut. The Verity shivered as power dipped. I heard the coolant hiss like rain on a hot street. "Back," he said. "Good. You bought yourself a minute, Admiral. Mine's burning. We'll keep it elegant if you keep it honest." "We're past elegant," Gia muttered, "but we're still clean." "Mirror arrays cool to pewter," Admiral Rafe whispered, "Look." On the public bands, the witness buoys confessed. They had been told to worship the corridor, and they were now reporting its sin. The compact's flagship hesitated. "I swear to you it did." In that breath, we slid under its camera arc and came up on the far side with our children and our blood and our bread still ours. "Damage," I said. "Bow plates hot enough to burn your hand through a glove," Sugiyama said. 2 crew with heat rash, 1 with a blister on the wrist. We're spilling a little coolant. I can catch it if the exchangers stop sulking." "Catch it," I said. "Reckon without excuses." Civilian vignette. A nurse smiles without showing teeth, because her face is too tired for big emotions. A kid says the humming stopped shaking and asks if that's good, and the grandmother says yes. A miner leans his head back and closes his eyes for exactly 5 seconds before opening them again. A teacher says out loud, "We are not numbers unless we count ourselves." A botanist writes water now and turns the sprayer once, listening for the hiss. A cook wipes his hands on a towel and forgets to put the towel back because his hands have never been this still. "Finish it," Gia said softly, as if we were in a library. "Show them the price of their corridor." "Public bands," I said. "Post the witness feed with their own seals at the top. Put our costs below it in 3 lines. Don't hide the blister. Don't hide the coolant. Don't hide the minutes. We will leave the ledger open." The envoy returned one last time in that run, flatter than a dead calm. "Admiral Kepler, they said you have violated the spirit of safe passage. We will file claims." "You timed consent," I said. "You wrote corridors over hunger and called it clean. File your claims." The world watched. I looked at Pelion's thin blue and thought of kitchens with onions and rivers with stones. The Verity's hull thrummed lower now, a tired animal easing into its weight. Admiral Alethea said we have 38 minutes until their reinforcement window. The convoy can make slingshot to the nightward side of Pelion's shadow and vanish into the mid-belt noise if we keep our laughs quiet. Or we can stay and write more notes on the chalkboard. We'll keep writing, if they keep pretending, I said. But for this breath, and I let my lungs teach me the rest. We get the med barges to the clinics, and we get the freighters under shield. Hold your fire. Open your hands. Civilian vignette. A nurse takes a sip of water and tastes metal and relief and keeps drinking anyway. A kid asks if there will be breakfast, and the cook says yes, because there will be if he has to invent it. A miner checks the lines even though he knows they're fine and says still fine like a spell. A teacher draws a star on the map, where the corridor once told them to kneel, then draws a circle around the star. A botanist writes down the humidity and smiles because numbers behave when you ask them politely. A cook cuts the lucky roll into 4 pieces and shares it because luck multiplies better than it divides. Admiral Alethea said the compact is recalibrating. They will not make the same mistake next burn. I wouldn't respect them if they did, I answered. Good. We'll teach the next lesson with fewer ghosts and more witness. We are not afraid of their clock. We drifted the convoy into Pelion's nightward belt, where the noise of rock and wreck and old copper wiring gave us shelter, and I let my shoulders drop a notch I hadn't known I was holding. Sugiyama's teams crawled the port exchanger with thermal paste and slow breath. Gia paced the bridge without sound, hands behind her back. Eyes tracing the afterimage of the corridor still burned into our plot. Rafe drank water like it was an oath and then went back to teaching our ghosts new grammar. Alethea dimmed her cymbal to a low ember, listening to every band where the compact rehearsed anger. We learned their music. Now we changed the key. 35 minutes to their reinforcements, Alethea said. Signal intelligence suggests a doctrinal review packet is en route. They will try to repair their witness failure by redefining it as malice. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and felt salt dry under my fingertips. They'll call honesty a hack, Gia muttered. We'll call their hack a habit. The consoles glowed warm and steady. The hull thrummed like an old heart under a stethoscope. Comms, I said, tag the clean channels for Pelion clinics. Tell them we'll shuttle the pediatric cases first. Rafe plot quiet arcs that ride the debris gradient. I don't want to leave a finger smear. Put the accounting where everyone can reach it. Civilian vignette. A nurse on Mercy 2 presses her palm to an incubator and whispers a name into plastic so the name has somewhere to live. A miner on Harrow loosens a coupler and feels the bite of cold steel through gloves that smell faintly of machine oil. A teacher divides a sheet of paper into 4 squares and writes morning, noon, evening rest so the day looks like a box you can put away. A cook tests soup with a wooden spoon and blows on it, tasting metal and cumin and relief. A janitor tapes another green square to another wall because windows can be invented. A child practices writing the number 8 until it looks like a sleeping snake, and then laughs because it finally does. A botanist mists the leaves and watches the droplets gather like tiny worlds that did not ask for clocks. Shuttle 1 clear, Gia said. Shuttle 2 5 minutes. We'll keep our heat tucked. Sugiyama chimed in with static fuzz on the edge of his words. Port exchanger is limping like a proud old mule. I won't ask it to dance again unless you send it roses. Consider them sent, I said. Steady your care. Do not let them rename it. Reinforcements came in quiet 4 cutters, a command corvette, 2 doctrine ships big with stored law, and a data barge thick with witnesses. They announced themselves by not announcing like a man who walks into a room and waits for everyone else to notice. They've patched their language, Alethea said. They now call timers benevolent horizon markers. They have grafted the word humane onto audit clauses I have not seen before. Translate, I said. Render it in what a cook would understand. They want to bake the deadline into the recipe, Admiral, she said. And they want to charge double when anyone eats late. Turn their recipe back into ingredients. Public bans, I ordered. Post their new words next to the old ones. Draw lines where they swapped mercy for leverage. Keep the font kind. Let the contrast do the work. Rafe's laughter had no sound in it. Kindness with teeth, he said. My favorite blade. The smell of ozone drifted across the bridge as static climbed our antenna masts. Admiral Kepler, the new envoy, said a different voice and the same policy. Your convoy will submit to horizon markers for safe audit. Witnesses have arrived. We will ensure your compliance is recorded kindly. You have 19 minutes. Brace, then open your eyes wide. Back to 19, Gia murmured. Same red ring with a different poem. I tasted stale coffee in my mouth and decided against another sip. Alethea, I said, are our ledger beacons ready? I can seed the neutral nodes with a living balance, she replied. Every action they take will add its own line. It will resist deletion by requiring a receipt of the deletion. Do it, I said. The world is tired of cooked books. Balance lives against claims without lying. Civilian vignette. A nurse tapes a list to a bulkhead that reads, things we can do slowly and still do well. A child plays with a Velcro strap and discovers the sound it makes is funny until it isn't and then stops. A miner wipes condensation off a gauge with the knuckle of his thumb, leaving a clean circle like a coin. A teacher fingers the corner of a page until it softens, then turns it with care because the story deserves it. A botanist pinches a yellowing leaf and whispers, I'm sorry, as she removes it, because apology belongs in every language. A cook sets out mugs in a line and then makes the line crooked because perfect is suspicious. Admiral Sugiyama said I can give you one more long lie at 80% push. After that, I'm into bargaining and superstition. One will do, I answered. We're building a classroom, not a fire. We are not your students. We are your mirror. The compact doctrine ships unfolded gates for their witnesses. Buoys bloomed like lanterns. The command corvette held back, posing for its own cameras. They will attempt to herd you into a new corridor, Alethea said. This one claims to be verified by independent auditors. I can see 3 auditors' tiny drones with jurisdiction patches and no shields. They'll claim the drone's presence sanctifies the path, Gia said. And if anything goes wrong, they'll blame the wind. Rafe, I said, shine the wind. He nodded, fingers quick. The lattice kites we'd kept lofted began to hum, their thin skins catching the doctrine ship's scout beams and returning them along curves the compact had forgotten a decade ago. On the plot, the verified corridor lit up like bone. Count the price where they count their praise. We announced our refusal in a voice without anger. Ultimatum compact. I said your horizon markers frame consent as hunger. Our convoy declines your corridor. Your witnesses are invited to observe from outside the blast radius of your claims. The envoy replied at once, too fast for good listening. Your defiance is noted. Consequences will accrue to your account. Public bans. I said add their sentence to the ledger. Title it exactly as they titled it. Then write the number of children on our med barges in the cell beside it. We will not let them erase lines. The cutters moved first, throwing thin jaw beams across our perceived exit arcs, combing without admitting it. They've tailored their comb frequency to our current ghost grammar, Rafe warned. They learned. Alethea dimmed another shade. They have also salted the neutral bands with op-eds accusing us of falsifying the witness feed earlier, she said. The data barge is amplifying. Clip the chain of custody on that feed, I said. Post the hash signatures and the moment they signaled approval. No adjectives. Just the time. Mirrors do not argue, they show. Civilian vignette. A nurse smooths a blanket and hums while she does it so the sound becomes part of the smoothing. A child tries to catch a dust mote in a beam of light and giggles when it slips away. A miner stares at his hands and sees the tiny scars that know more about machines than he ever will. A teacher underlines the word witness and then underlines it again because the first line did not feel like enough. A botanist smells the air and says rain even though there is no sky here, only cooling coils. A cook wipes the condensation off a viewport and leaves a palm print big and human and stubborn. Timer at 16, Gia said. Their comb is tightening. Our ghosts are still singing, but someone tuned their ear. Sugiyama hissed air between his teeth. Admiral, I'm seeing a flutter in the starboard loop. It's gossiping with port. I can keep them from arguing out loud if you give me 5 seconds of quiet in the next minute. You'll have it, I promised. Steady 5 seconds like a bridge. Plan-changing escalation. The doctrine ships did not hurt us. They cut power to the dialysis clinics on Pelion for 50 seconds, then lit the corridor brighter, as if to say, see, we can make the world wiggle. Gia's head snapped up. They touched the clinics, she said. Alethea's voice cooled into steel. They have violated medical neutrality flag E19. Public, I said, post the flag. Post the timestamp. Post the witness drone's telemetry during the outage. The ledger beacon clacked in my mind like chalk. Rafe, I said, prepare for the inside-out turn they have read about, and still do not believe we will try again. But this time we don't move the flagship. We move the auditors. Brace their audit against its own rules. Admiral Alethea said on a private channel, only she and I could hear, I am going to ask you a question you will not like. Ask, I said. If we force their auditors to record their own violation, we also force the auditors to become targets. They are small, unarmored, and trusted by the naive. Will you risk them under the doctrine ship's angles to burn this lesson into the book? I swallowed copper. No, I said. We will not risk them. We will risk ourselves. Define risk, she said, calculus, pushing for numbers. We will sit between their fire and the auditors and let their beams outline our hulls. We will leave a silhouette they cannot deny. We will take the heat and name it. Understood, she said, and there was a note in her voice like a bow across wire. We brace. We do not bend the throat. Civilian vignette. A nurse sees a readout flicker and lays a hand on a tiny foot until the number remembers itself. A child holds a cup with 2 hands and drinks like the cup might float away if they loosen. A miner knots a line around a pipe, the way his mother taught him on a river that never saw a star. A teacher looks at the clock and then at the children and puts the clock face down. A botanist licks a finger and holds it up to a vent's breath, smiling at the small cool. A cook sets aside a second loaf because sometimes you need a spare hope. 5 seconds, Sugiyama whispered. Now. I cut thrust. The ship sagged around us. The hum fell a tone. The air tasted briefly like tin. Back, he said, and the Verity lifted herself like a woman finding her spine. Count notches you can survive. We moved into the auditor's shadow between them and the doctrine ships, and our Lattice gently pulled their beams around the drones' skins without touching them. Record, I said. Record with our seals and theirs. Record the shape of our hull when we took the line meant to shape consent. The auditors, to their credit, kept recording. The cutters sped up their comb in frustration. The envoy tried on yet another voice and found a threat that sounded like charity. Admiral Kepler, they said you are distorting observation. Step aside so the auditors can verify safe passage. Your corridor is an ambush, Gia said even. Their verification would be an alibi. Open your hands. Let the world see what's in them. Plan changing escalation. 2 arrived as a burst from the data barge. They flooded the neutral bands with a clip of our earlier mirror turn, stripped of context, overlaid with the whisper that Alethea is a rogue AI. They're calling me unsupervised, Alethea said. They are asking for permission to collar me under emergency protocol. No, I said. No collars. Not on my ship. Public bands post our oversight charter. Post the line where Alethea's decisions require human veto. Post my signature. My name on a page felt like a small ship in a big storm. The bridge smelled like hot polymer and the faint sweetness of coolant beginning to cook. We learn with friends, not with chains. Civilian vignette. A nurse glances at the audit feed on a pocket screen and then puts it away because she has a pulse in her hand more important than any argument. A child holds up a drawing of a fish and says it is the verity, and I agree because it is. A miner tightens a bolt with exactly enough torque and grunts the little HNH sound every tight bolt deserves. A teacher writes consent and then sits with the word for a long time without saying it aloud. A botanist turns a lamp a fraction and the leaf lifts its face. A cook pinches salt between finger and thumb and lets it fall like snow into soup. Timer at 12, Alethea said. Their corvette has cued a humane censure burst that will blind our shuttles without rupturing hulls. Gia's mouth went hard. They're going to make us stumble and call it leading. Rafe, I said, write a stumble that trips their foot. He found it the small rhythm defect in their burst and tuned our shields to leave a slit, exactly where their kindness would hurt most. When they fired, our shuttle slid through the slit with grace, and their burst burned a shadow of their own comb into the witness feed. Mirror their mercy until it looks like law, Admiral Sugiyama said. Breathy starboard loop coughed up truth. We have a blister forming along deck 4. I've got crews with pads and cold packs light burns and one wrist sprain from a stupid slip. He laughed once rough. He slipped on his own pride, trying to beat the flow to the flange. Tell him his admiral has done worse, I said. Patch what you can. Describe the rest. Don't hide me from my ship. We pressed closer to the auditors, until the doctrine ships had to widen their lances or scorch their own. The envoy cracked a little. You are obstructing humanitarian verification, they said, and I realized they thought the phrase itself was a shield. Count words like bullets when they're aimed. The last major set piece opened its mouth when the doctrine ships triggered the remit protocol, a move that reroutes fines and costs in real time from non-compliant parties to doctrine enforcement accounts. They tried to debit our convoy on the spot for the electricity Pelion hadn't used during the dialysis outage they caused. I felt my knuckles go white on the arm of my chair. Alethea, I said very quietly. Are the ledger beacons ready to return remittances to the place they were stolen from in public without touching anyone's private purse? Yes, she said. I can send every debit back down the line until it reaches the exact clause that justified it, and then I can post the clause beside the credit note with the auditor's seal. Do it, I said. Settle the account where it was opened. Civilian vignette. A nurse watches a number climb and keeps her hand steady so the climb feels like a staircase, not a cliff. A child counts their breaths backward from 10 and then forwards because both were fun. A miner swears softly in an old language and kisses his lucky rag as if it were a person. A teacher smiles at a joke about gravity someone made and writes it down to remember later. A botanist tests pH with a strip that turns a color she likes and decides that counts as a good omen. A cook cracks a knuckle and winces at the tiny spark of pain that means the joint still belongs to him. The ledger beacons woke and wrote. The doctrine ship's accounts shivered, then spat back credits into Pelion's grid, in a cascade like rain hitting hot stone. The auditor's stamps lit green. The data barge tried to erase the trail and failed because our beacons had asked the deletion to sign its own confession. We do not close books in smoke. Plan-changing escalation. 3 landed when the doctrine ships, embarrassed and angry, dropped pretense and spooled a coercive throttle field that would have locked every drive in our convoy to idle. "They're going for a grip," Gia said. "Women who cannot stand to let anyone walk on their own." Alethea's symbol brightened. "I can slip one ship through the Verity. With our lattice angled, we can amplify their field and bottle it." "But Admiral," "I know," I said. We stand in the doorway. We take the pinch so the rest can run. Admiral Rafe said softly, "You will be a lighthouse and a wall at the same time. You might crack." "I crack clean," I said. "I do not splinter. Brace yourself. Let them pass." Civilian vignette. A nurse looks at the Verity through a viewport and puts her hand against the glass as if we can feel it. A child says, "She is holding us," and the grandmother nods like she has known this feeling before. A miner grips a rail so tight the tendons stand up like ropes. A teacher calls roll again, as if names are charms that keep ships safe. A botanist closes her eyes and pictures a tree rooted in steel and is surprised by how true it feels. A cook whispers a recipe for bread under his breath, not because he needs to remember it, but because names of ingredients are a kind of prayer. We pushed into the throttle field and set our lattice to act like a jar. The field flexed against our plates with a sound like bones grinding. The smell of hot dust rose up through the vents. My teeth ached. The convoy slid past under our shadow drives free. The auditors recorded everything in a silence so loud it felt like applause. "We anchor here. We do not own you." "Damage," I said, "because honest is a habit." Sugiyama came back with the list I had earned. Bow plates at 60%. 2 crew with second-degree burns on forearms. 1 hairline crack and a support strut that will need a brace. I want 5 hours somewhere quiet with a welder and patience. "You'll get 3, I said. "We'll make the other 2 with stubbornness." "Works for me," he said. Open the door, close the trap they made for themselves. The doctrine ships made their last mistake then. They fired a gentle correction, a short, wide beam meant to nudge us aside without leaving a mark straight through their own witness geometry. The auditor's sensors caught Corvette light on auditor lens, and the data barge could only watch as its integrity metric dipped. Alethea's voice came like rain after dust. "They have failed their own proof." "Public," I said, voice low post the clip. "Tag it with their doctrinal citation. Title it, 'Kindly Fire-Wounding Truth.' Reckon your kindness when it cuts." In the space that followed, the convoy slid to Pelian's clinics, their lines unloading in the careful hurry of people who have learned which sting matters. The doctrine ships tried one more horizon marker. We did not answer. The neutral bands murmured not with opinion, but with math and receipts, and the old quiet power of people who had finally seen the kitchen where the sausage was made. We did not go for their throats. We went for their ledger. The Assembly of Neutral Trade did not publish a poem. They published a policy. Timer-conditioned consent, they wrote in letters that did not reach for the sky, is unlawful coercion. Underwriters pulled their grace from doctrine corridors until auditors could be armored and independent again. The remit protocol lost its teeth in 3 jurisdictions and then in 6. We teach first, we fight only if forced. Civilian vignette. A nurse sleeps for 12 minutes, sitting up and wakes smiling, because 12 minutes is wealth. A child counts the green squares and says there are as many as there need to be. A miner writes the word "still here" on a strip of tape and sticks it to the toolbox where he'll see it later. A teacher lets the children draw their ships, and no one's ship is wrong. A botanist propagates a cutting and labels it Pelion's luck, then changes it to Pelion's work. A cook burns the first pan of bread and laughs, then makes the second perfect and doesn't say a word about it. And we took the Verity down to the clinic's orbit like an old dancer with a bruised knee and let the med barges dock. The smell of antiseptic and warm air bled through the interlocks when we opened them. The hull stopped singing quite so loud. I felt the bridge's glow settle into the skin. Admiral Alethea said a final notice from the compact. They have filed claims for damages to their doctrine. Her tone did not change when she added, "They request a public debate between your ethics and their math." "We already had it," Gia said. "They just didn't like the grade. Count what stays, let the rest go." "Post our costs beneath theirs," I said. "List them plain, the blisters, the burns, the coolant, the strut. Put the minutes we gave the clinics in a line with the same weight. When they cry theft, show them we returned every debit to its source and wrote down our own." Rafe leaned back and finally let his face show the tired. "Admiral," he said, "you promised your crew you'd bring them home." "I did," I said, and I watched the convoy settle like stones into deep water, where the current can't have them. In the days that followed, the compact changed their language again, but the world had already learned a new skill. It asked for receipts before it bowed. Alethea archived the witness feeds in a library that anyone could visit without an appointment. The doctrine ships stopped opening corridors like traps at parties and started asking for talks where people could say no without a clock behind their backs. We remember because writing is a kind of care. The Verity limped into a repair cradle that smelled like cold iron and ozone and the hot sugar scent of burned insulation. Sugiyama got his 5 hours and a welder that sang too loud. Gia slept for the first hour, then woke and walked the decks speaking to crew whose names she knew better than her own. Rafe taught the ghosts to be quiet for a while. I stood under Alethea's symbol and let the quiet enter my bones. "Admiral," she said, "not cold and not warm. You told me you would go to the line and no farther." "I did," I said. "You did," she agreed. "I did not have to challenge you, but I would have." "I know," I said. "Thank you. We do not fear decent arguments." Civilian vignette. A nurse writes down the names of every child who slept for an hour with no alarms, then puts the list away and doesn't show anyone because quiet is a private joy. A child brings a drawing of the Verity to the viewport and sticks it there with tape so we can see ourselves the way they do. A miner ties his rag on a new rail and says, "There, like placing a flag." A teacher asks for a story about a ship that teaches by numbers, and the children shout, "We know it." A botanist presses her hand to a plant's pot and feels the faint damp cool and thinks about rivers. A cook puts aside one piece of bread and doesn't say why. When the compact returned to court weeks later, they found fewer chairs reserved for them. Their witnesses wore thicker skins. Their timers had been torn out of the preambles. The remit protocol had a new preface that forbade debiting hunger into the future. They protested. The assembly shrugged and pointed at ledgers built in sunlight. "We did not write poetry into law. We wrote procedure you could teach a child without making them cry." We left the chalkboard standing where everyone could reach it. We did not gloat. I went to the Verity's bow and laid a hand on the plate that bore heat once and now only held a memory of heat. It felt like a kettle gone cold, blackened and useful. In the end, we logged our precedent in 2 lines, as clean as I could make them. Timer-conditioned consent is coercion. Any corridor that hides a cost forfeits its claim to safety. A neutral clerk stamped them without ceremony and moved on to the next paper. That was the justice I wanted, boring, repeatable standing after the music stopped. In the quiet after action, I stood on my bridge and breathed air that smelled faintly of solvent and warm polymer and the lemon of a wiped console. My crew moved with the careful slowness of people who know they've kept a promise. Alethea dimmed herself to a hush. Outside, Pelion turned the same way it had turned when the first red ring was drawn, and farmers looked up and saw nothing but weather to worry about, not deadlines wearing uniforms. That was victory enough, no pageantry, only the return of ordinary tasks to ordinary hands. I have been called cautious and cruel, soft-hearted, and manipulative, a poet and a bureaucrat. I prefer teacher who brings water. If there is a doctrine to stand against it, should count its own costs in daylight. If there is a fleet to command, it should place bodies between harm and those who breathe quietly. And if an AI asks how far you will go, you should answer with a number and then stay inside it. We did not end the compact. We ended one habit. That will be enough until the next lesson. We will meet it with ledgers that anyone can read and hands that do not tremble when they lift the chalk. Blockade lights dim. The public tally turns over. The mirror skins on our kites dull to pewter as the heat leaves them. Consent is not a timer, it is a choice we make together.